In today's video, we continue our Doctor Who coverage looking at artifact support cards across all 4 decks because it just seems to be an easier way to do it, but there are some absolute crazy cards here that are going to be worth talking about, so let's jump into the video. Alright, thanks everybody for being here, and if you guys missed yesterday's video, I did make a video talking about some of the spoilers just that started to come out, and I've now since made the executive decision to kind of split these spoilers up into, like, thematically related things. I'm probably not going to cover everything, like commons and uncommons that aren't very good, but I'm pretty much trying to go through all the noteworthy stuff and talk about it, and then we'll do a video talking about the reprints as well, because there are some banger reprints in these decks, and they're pretty solid, especially when you look at the reprints we got in Commander Masters, which were just, you know, underwhelming to say the least. So there's a lot of stuff to like about these decks, and if you're a Doctor Who fan, I'm sure for you it's even more enjoyable, but for me, as someone who doesn't really know jack shit about Doctor Who, I'm just pretty happy about, you know, some of these new cards actually being good and some of the reprints being good as well. If you guys have not yet done so, please consider hitting that subscribe button and click the like and bell icons as well. If you want to stay tuned for all the up-to-date videos and content and all of that, I very much appreciate it. We are going to jump right into the video, though. I think I got 13 cards to look at today, and I just, like I said, the only rhyme or reason is that they are all artifact related. Beyond that, I don't have too much to link them together, but let's just get started. So first up, we've got Dalek Squadron, and I don't know if I've been mispronouncing this. Dalek, I have no idea, nor do I care, to be honest with you, because you know what I'm saying. But I will say these showcase frames actually look really cool. Like, you have the outline of the TARDIS. This one is 2 in a black, and it has Myriad and Menace. So Myriad, if you're not familiar, is when you attack, create a copy of it that's attacking each other player, and then, of course, Menace says, you know, it has to be blocked by 2 or more creatures. There are a lot of Myriad supports in this deck, including a card that we'll get to in a little bit that actually allows you to bypass the restriction of having to sack stuff at the end of the turn for Myriad, and it's really, really interesting to see that. I think that this deck as a whole, or this, like, Dalek engine, you know, looking at some of the new cards, is going to be really, really fun, and actually might have a lot of firepower in Commander, so I'm pretty excited to see these, but this one's not bad. It is an uncommon, but it does a lot for relatively low mana, and I think that's not, you know, something kind of worth parsing over. Cyberman Patrol is a 2-drop, colorless artifact creature that says artifact creatures you control have Afflict 3. What that means is if a creature with Afflict attacks and it is blocked, the opponent takes 3 damage. That starts to add up quick when you consider the fact that you can make copies of them with things like Myriad, and then the opponent either has to block them and take damage and potentially lose a creature as well, or not block them and still take the damage. It is actually pretty crazy that this card only costs 2 mana, but it does feel like it has a lot of potential, especially with some of the new Myriad-focused cards, so I just wanted to cover it here because, again, it is a solid card that is a 2/2 for 2 mana. That's not too shabby. Cyberman Squadron is a 7-drop artifact creature. Cyberman, non-legendary artifact creatures you control have Myriad. So that means that you can give Myriad to all of your non-legendaries. When they attack, you make a copy attacking all players. This is really good. There's a reason it costs 7, but artifacts, as we know, have a lot of ways to cheat out cards, including things that reduce the cost of colorless cards. So this, on paper, feels like a really, really strong card, and there's just so many different ways you could take that build. But being able to make copies of your creatures, even if you're not playing, you know, the new commander that allows you to bypass that Myriad end phase sacrifice restriction thing, there is still a lot of potential combos here with this, and so keep an eye out on this card because I do think you're going to see a lot of people trying to find ways to make it work. Cybership is a 6-drop artifact vehicle with flying. Whenever it deals combat damage to a player, put the top 2 cards of that player's library onto the battlefield face down under your control. They are 2/2 Cyberman artifact creatures, and it has crew 4. It is an 8/8, so certainly it can actually be crewed just by tapping the 2 opponent's creatures, so that's that you bring out, so that's interesting. You can't, like, flip them over necessarily like you could with, like, you know, some other morph mechanics. I think this is a more unique mechanic just to the Cyberman stuff. But there are a lot of Cyberman-related or Cyberman-adjacent cards across one of the decks that allow you to interact with those in some way. So perhaps there are ways to figure out, you know, how to turn those things over. And the new card, I think it's Ugin's Mastery, that came out of Commander Masters, does allow you to turn your face-down cards face up as well. So you could certainly see combinations with these cards being practical in some situations. Cybermat is a 2-drop colorless artifact robot with Skulk, which means it can't be blocked by creatures with greater power. Whenever it attacks and isn't blocked, it gets +X+0 until end of turn, where X is the number of attacking artifact creatures. You can imagine this can become really strong really quickly if Myriad is in play here, and you're making multiple copies of multiple attacking artifact creatures, and because the opponent can't block it when it's a 2, if they don't block it and then everything else kind of goes off, you can deal a lot of damage with this. It just has some really cute interaction, and it's low cost and pretty easy to bring out. And of course, it can also Myriad itself, utilizing, you know, some of the new cards here, making copies of it and then hitting, you know, the opponents for a lot of damage. You really can kind of see the power start to stack up here without a doubt. Ashad, the Lone Cyberman. This is an insane card here. It's definitely one of the best new legendary artifact creatures that they have coming out here. This is 1 blue, black, red. It is a legendary artifact creature, Cyberman. This is the first non-legendary artifact spell you cast each turn as Casualty 2. If you don't remember Casualty from New Capenna, you can sacrifice a creature power 2 or greater, and then you're able to cast a copy of the spell. So that's pretty solid. And then whenever you sacrifice another creature, put a +1/+1 counter on Ashad, the Lone Cyberman. Just interesting to bring that casualty mechanic back, and I do think it has some use, especially because you can sacrifice the Cybermans that you take, you know, off the opponent's deck, or the face-down Cyberman tokens you make, meaning you're not really giving up a ton of resources in order to make this card actually work. Plus, that color combination is pretty solid for what it's worth, and so it's just another thing to keep in mind. Midnight Crusader Shuttle is a 4-drop artifact vehicle with, whenever it attacks, defending player faces a villainous choice. That player sacrifices a creature, or you gain control of a creature of your choice that player controls until end of turn. If you gain control of a creature this way, tap it, and it's attacking that player. And then it has crew 2. Now, I'm not a huge fan of vehicles. I think a lot of vehicles end up being underpowered. Obviously, there are decks that can like utilize them to the fullest, but even then, they're still kind of weaker just inherently in some cases, with obvious exceptions. This is okay. I just don't think it's all that great. Obviously, in most cases, they're probably just going to sack a creature. I don't see why they would let you take a creature otherwise, especially when it's going to be attacking them. So this one's kind of underwhelming, but I wanted to at least cover it. The Master, Gallifrey's End, is a 2 black-red legendary Time Lord Rogue. With whenever a non-token artifact creature you control dies, you may exile it. If you do, choose an opponent with the most life among your opponents. That player faces a villainous choice. They lose 4 life, or you create a token that's a copy of that card. So, whenever one of your artifact creatures dies, legendary or otherwise, your opponent can either take 4 damage, or they give you a token that's a copy of it. Obviously, that circumstance is going to change depending on, you know, what's going on and where they're at in the game. But if a lot of them start to die at once, the opponent's going to have to make the choice each time, and that damage can really start to stack up. So you have, you know, a win-win for you. You're either dealing 10% of their life total in a game of Commander, or you're getting a copy of your artifact. So it's pretty darn good either way. Delete is actually really, really powerful. It is a sorcery that costs X red, deal X damage to each non-artifact creature and each player. So if you're playing a deck that's pretty much exclusively artifacts, you can essentially utilize just to board wipe the opponents and not have to take the damage yourself. In terms of your creatures, of course, you will still take life damage, but, you know, you could pay 5 for this and deal 5 damage to every non-artifact creature, and then you have a wide open board. And we've seen how easy it is to sort of make copies of other things here with some of these new mechanics. So this is a really good board wipe that I just think has a lot of potential in general. It's not quite as good as Blasphemous Act, but in certain decks, I think it can actually be more beneficial overall to your strategy. Strax, Santaron Nurse, is 3 red, green, and it's a legendary alien cleric with vigilance and trample. You can pay 2 and tap, sack an artifact, choose a player at random. When you do, Strax fights another target creature that player controls. And then whenever it deals damage to a creature, you put a +1/+1 counter on it. It's okay. I don't really think it's anything crazy. I guess being able to fight at will is pretty solid, but it's still, and you still have to sack an artifact, so it's not exactly like free, quote unquote, but it's still really good and has a lot of things going for it in that regard. The Moment is an artifact, and while it's not direct artifact support, I figured it fit in here nicely enough. It is a 2-drop. At the beginning of your upkeep, put a time counter on it. Pay 2, tap, untap target creature you control. It phases out until the moment leaves the battlefield. Then you can pay 3 and destroy each non-land permanent with mana value less than or equal to the number of time counters on it, then sacrifice it. So essentially, you can get your creatures off the board to protect them, and then you can pop stuff on the board and then bring them back. This certainly seems like it has some interesting utility, and it doesn't cost a lot to play, which is definitely going to be one of the things working in its favor. Tegan Javanka is 2 and a white legendary creature human. Whenever you attack, target attacking historic creature gets +1/+1 and gains indestructible until end of turn. Of course, artifacts, legendaries, and sagas are historic, and then it has Doctor's Companion. So basically, you attack, you can give a creature +1/+1 and indestructible. It's not crazy or anything, but it's definitely solid, and if you bring it out at the same time as, like, one of your doctors or your commander in general, you can certainly protect it. So it's okay. It's relatively low enough cost where I could see it having some useful elements to it. Rotating Fireplace is 3-drop artifact that enters the battlefield tapped with a time counter on it. You can tap at an amount of colorless mana equal to the number of time counters on Rotating Fireplace, then pay 4 tap, Time Travel, activate only as a sorcery. For each suspended card you own and each permanent you control with time counters, you may add or remove one. Obviously, this works really, really well with a lot of the new suspend cards and some of the old suspend cards as well, but in itself, it can kind of stack mana on itself as you go along, and it does come in with a time counter. So in decks like even Eldrazi, if you're looking outside of the specter of just the new Doctor Who stuff, this card definitely has a place in there. And finally, we've got the Master Multiply. This is 4 black-red. It is a legendary Time Lord Rogue with Myriad. The legend rule doesn't apply to creature tokens you control. Triggered abilities you control can't cause you to sacrifice or exile creature tokens you control. Now, this card is absolutely busted. The legend rule meaning basically you can have more than one legendary. So this has Myriad, it attacks, you create a token copy for each opponent, and then you have 3 and you don't have to send them to the graveyard because you already have, the legend rule being ignored. But triggered abilities not making you sacrifice or exile creatures is wild because Myriad is a triggered ability that says create those copies they're attacking at the beginning of the next end steps, exile them. You don't have to do that here, meaning they stay on the field. But the more interesting part is as further turns go on, if the opponents don't get those things off the board, you can keep copying things, and that is just an absolutely, that's a gold mining commander just waiting to happen, where people are going to find so many different combo lines and strategies with this. It's probably my favorite card out of all the Doctor Who cards that they've announced, simply because it's such a unique approach to the mechanic, but also just seems practically to work really, really well with a lot of these new cards. I think it can also fit into other strategies and other existing cards with Myriad. We haven't gotten too many Myriads lately, but there's certainly a nice enough selection out of there that you can find things to make them work. And, that's just kind of the tip of the iceberg on this. So, a really, really strong card and a slate of artifact cards overall that both will work within the commander decks, but also just for generic support for other artifact-based strategies. I actually think this is really, really cool, and I'm pretty excited to get my hands on some of these cards just to try and build some things with it. So, I'd like to know what you guys think of these reveals. Obviously, I will be continuing with more reveals tomorrow. We'll keep going through the themes and talking about them and such. But for today, that's going to do it. Thank you guys for watching. Let me know in the comments down below what you think, and I'll catch you in the next video. Peace.